Welcome to the Digital Health and Care Wales Audit and Assurance Committee meeting. There will be a number of colleagues joining us during the course of the morning, if they're not already on this call. And I'd like to welcome in particular Siobhan Mansfield, who's attending to present the deep dive on staff vacancies. Ivan Evans, Executive Director of Strategy for the Internal Audit Report section. Nadine Payne, who will be joining us to respond to the Stakeholder Engagement Performance Audit. Alison Smith, responding to questions on the audit review on performance management. And we'll be expecting Andrew Warburton of Information Services and Cadwyn Lloyd-Jones, who's already joined us, to answer questions on the switching service audit review. But for your information, we did meet a few days ago as independent members as per recognised corporate best practice. That was an annual meeting without the executives being present. I just wanted to put on record that I thought that was a very helpful and constructive meeting, and I'd like to thank the auditors as well as Counter-Fraud for their engagement with that process. It was very much appreciated. And as per usual, I have met with colleagues from both internal and external audit to go through today's agenda, and I'd like to extend my thanks to them for giving me of their time to go through this agenda. So, can I just check that we are recording today's meeting. We are committed to openness and transparency, and as such, we do conduct as much of our business as possible in open session so that members of the public are welcome to observe. And to that end, we are recording today's meeting, which is being held virtually by MS Teams. The recording will subsequently be posted on the website following this meeting, and as usual, today's committee meeting papers can be accessed on the DHCW website. We have a full agenda, as I'm sure you will have noticed. We will be taking a short comfort break of about 10 minutes between sections 4 and 5, hopefully, and the meeting is scheduled to close at about midday. There will be a 10-minute break following that end of that meeting and the start of the planned private session, which will begin at around 12:10. Thank you for listening to that brief introduction. I'll take apologies for absence. I don't seem to have any. And declarations of interest. Are there any declarations to be declared on any aspect of today's agenda? Not been notified of any. And if there are any, could you please notify on the chat? So we'll now move on to section 2 of the agenda, which is the consent agenda. And just to make sure that we focus on business critical activity, we are using the consent agenda for this meeting in consultation with the board secretary. I am assuming that you've all had a chance to read the papers under the consent section, and I just want to check whether you feel there are any issues that you'd like to move to the substantive agenda. If there are, do please raise your hand now. I can't see any, so I'll take it therefore that we're all happy as a committee to approve and note all the items as requested. They're quite a long list, but I'm going to go through them. Specifically, therefore, we are approving the minutes from the committee meetings held on October the 18th, both public and private abridged minutes. We are noting the contents of the forward work plan, item 2.2, including items scheduled to come to future committee meetings. We're noting the COVID inquiry updates, noting the All Wales Audit Chair's summary report, and noting the policy update, and specifically approving the 5 policies: DHCW validation policy, policy on policies, appraisal and development review policy, hybrid policy, and waste management policy, as outlined in item 2.5. We are approving the health and care standards, item 2.6, and the self-assessment position for each of the standards. And I'd like to remind you that with the introduction of the Quality Engagement Wales Act, the quality standards will be established to replace the health and care standards moving forward. So this year is the last year we'll be receiving the health and care standards in this current form. We'll also be approving the Audit and Assurance Committee terms of reference following the annual review, approving the Audit and Assurance Committee cycle of business, item 2.8, which sets out the planned activity for the committee over the next year or so. We'll be noting the Audit and Assurance Self-Effectiveness Report, approving the Audit and Assurance Annual Report, item 2.10, which will go to the next full board meeting at the end of March. And we'll be noting the Integrated Medium-Term Plan, item 2.11. I'd just like to draw your attention, though, that the update does focus on DHCW Strategic Mission 5. You'll remember that this involves being the trusted strategic partner and a high-quality, inclusive and ambitious organisation. Our Executive Director of Finance, Claire Osmond-Little, is the executive lead for this strategic mission, and this covers areas of relevance to the Audit and Assurance Committee set out as the 6 enablers of people and culture, finance, sustainability, stakeholder engagement, quality and safety, governance and assurance. Just a couple more to note. We are noting for assurance the Welsh Language Compliance and Improvement Framework, item 2.12, noting the Lincoln Risk Transition Project Closure Report, 2.13, following the successful transfer of these programmes from the NHS Wales Collaborative to DHCW on January the 1st. And finally, we are also noting the contents, item 2.14 of the NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership Assurance Committee from the 22nd of September 22. So it's a pleasure now then to move us on to the main substantive agenda, section 3, which includes the action log. Now, you'll see from that action log that there was one action captured from our last committee meeting on October the 18th, and that has now been completed. Can I just check whether there are any questions in relation to the action log? I can't see any, so we note the status of that action log and move on to part 4 of today's agenda, which is the audit and counter fraud section. And we'll open this part of today's meeting with the internal audit progress report. And it's my pleasure now to hand over to Stephen Cheney from Internal Audit to introduce the internal audit progress report. Croeso, Stephen.
Good morning all, and I will admit in advance I'm having some slight problems with Teams, so I do apologise if I disappear or if I'm not sounding quite right. I had a bit of difficulty connecting. Good morning all, and thank you, Chair. Recognising that we have a very packed agenda, I will keep it very brief, but obviously I will invite any questions from anyone that wishes to ask any. Martin Lewis will be joining us shortly. He is responsible for the IT audit side of our plan, of which we have one within this session around switching services. But if I may, I will go through the general audits first. So starting off with financial sustainability. This year we focused on not so much the broader aspect of financial sustainability, but more specifically around digital cost pressures. And with that focus, we were keen to understand what DCW were doing to achieve the balanced position, recognising that there are a lot of inflation coming through into the cost. Some of the contracts are already adhered to, and some of them are yet to be fully agreed. So we looked at the actions taken to alleviate some of those pressures, particularly around engagement with the Welsh Government to see if there is additional funding available. We also looked at and assessed the priority of the work that's underway, which are the key projects that definitely should be looking to go ahead. And overall, we found very good and very reasonable steps being undertaken to address some of those concerns. We found that good progress has been made at the point of the audit. There were a lot of actions underway yet to be completed, but we found good progress was being made. We also identified a range of digital cost pressure scenarios that were being calculated, which is what we anticipated. Alongside that, however, we did raise a number of recommendations. Collaboration between the commercial team and finance, and pooling and bringing together their knowledge was an area which could be developed. And as I mentioned already, priority over particular schemes that are coming under pressure. And we expect to see the continuing liaison with the Welsh Government. We also raised a couple of points around target dates and risks to be refined, and plans to be updated to address digital cost pressures. Whilst there are no new funding gaps for this year, albeit we are now approaching the end of the financial year, we do believe that next year this will need to be examined in a bit more detail. So overall, it was a very good, very positive report. I said it was a strong, reasonable assurance from that perspective. And this was one of the reports that was sort of Q3, Q4 of our plan for the year. We picked up an additional ad hoc review throughout the year, but otherwise we've had a total of 14 reviews to deliver. And we're well underway now to complete that plan on time. We have a handful of reviews left to deliver, of which some of those are already approaching completion. So we anticipate a timely completion of the plan for this year's opinion. So subsequent to financial sustainability, we also carried out 2 reviews around performance management and embedding the stakeholder engagement plan. And these 2 are best read side by side because there are references within the stakeholder engagement to pick up and look at performance management as well. So we have a bit of a linkage there, but the same principle applies to both of them. In essence, we're looking to see what's being done to link the strategy through to a plan, which then in turn links to delivery of that plan.
Stephen,
and
can I
again,
just pause for a moment, if I may?
Yes,
Do you
of course.
mind if we just take the audit reports individually? Might be helpful if we focus. And we have you've taken us through the financial sustainability audit, and it's very pleasing to get that reasonable assurance on that audit. I'd like to invite my colleagues from DHCW perhaps to respond to that report. And I can see Mark and Claire Osmond-Little are both ready to come in. And then I suggest we open it for questions or observations from colleagues, and we take each audit report in turn, if you're happy with that approach. So Claire, would you like to come in first, or Mark? I'll leave it to you decide.
I'll pull rank, I think, Marion, and jump in first. Mark, by all means, correct me and interrupt if you feel necessary. I think this is a really important audit for me for a number of reasons. As you know, digital and digital inflation and the sustainability around our financing are really key questions that have been asked not only of the board, actually, but of the staff and also of the directors of finance. So I thought this was a really helpful document that really sort of validated our thinking in terms of our understanding on inflation, but equally about how we could improve the way we report our risks around inflation through our boards internally. So there was quite a lot of learning in that respect, which we'll pick up. The other point that came out of the report, Stephen actually mentioned it, is the importance of working collaboratively with our procurement teams. And we have a non-pay capital group where we try to achieve that collaboration. But I think the report highlighted in certainly around procurement of big contracts, the importance of us being part of that team and working collaboratively together, which actually we endeavour to do, but obviously there's room for improvement in that space. So I think the audit committee could be assured that actually the process that we've done to capture inflation and report inflation is there. It needs to be sharpened a bit in some of the responses and actions that come out of that. And we do work closely with Michelle and her team in procurement, but there is obviously areas that we could improve around some of the sensitivity analysis that can enhance the value we create together in that space. So those were my observations, and I'm sure, Mark, you'll want to add to that, those comments.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks for pulling rank. I think you put it a lot better than I ever could. But I think just to mirror that, and thanks Stephen and his team really. It was an involving piece, an emerging piece. Claire obviously cited it as part of her sort of viewing of the future pressures with DHEW and on a national perspective. And it was quite hardening, Stephen, to be honest with you, because some of the recommendations we'd already put in place. So at the last audit committee, we had a deep dive into digital cost pressures and made some significant recommendations regarding how we would articulate digital cost pressure risks within the risk register. So that aligned to some of the recommendations that came out of the audit committee. So that was very heartening. It was, they're all very interesting, they're all very useful sort of exercises, but this was particularly enlightening, I think, for DHEW. As Claire said, it underlined some of the best practice that we've put in place, and also some areas of improvement. On the commercial side, we have sort of strengthened the sort of communications between the teams, and in fact, the head of commercial services has initiated weekly meetings with the finance team. So that sort of sits under the capital non-paid group, which, as Claire mentioned, also provides a forum for discussion there as well. So I think, in terms of putting the quick wins in place, we've also done that as part of our response to the recommendations.
Thank you, Mark. And as you say, it's a very healthy endorsement of the observations that were made at the deep dive last October, and a pleasing result. Can I just check whether there are any questions from colleagues on this particular audit? I can see Ruth's hand. Ruth Lazard, our Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question really for Claire and Mark. Does this help us? It's a positive audit. It says that we're doing everything we possibly can with regards to financial sustainability, but financial sustainability isn't really within our own gift. I'm confident that we're doing everything that we can, but there are issues out with us around our funding model, which are a bigger concern. So has this been helpful in being able to communicate some of that? Because you can't point to us not doing what we should be doing.
I think where it's been really useful, Ruth, is to endorse the approach that we've done to recognise that digital inflation, for example, is has its own characteristics and influences, which differentiates it from general underlying inflation, which is a position that we've tried to land within Welsh Government to acknowledge that because of exchange rates, because of supply chain issues, but equally because generally we buy products that are licensed, we have seen a disproportionate price pressure. So the work that Stephen's done has really underpinned that, and I think endorsed that actually that is the case. And therefore it's quite helpful in that respect to support some of the narrative that we've been talking about in a broader financial context. In terms of financial sustainability, I think you're right. We are subject to income streams that are complex, and equally, our value is in other areas of the NHS in Wales. So equally, what the report hasn't highlighted is any gaps that we may have in the approach that we're taking that might highlight areas that we need to focus in. So I found it quite assuring that actually collectively the approach we've taken is substantially the right approach. I think what it also has highlighted is we need to be far more effective in the way that we articulate the risks around that. And that echoes actually Welsh Audit Office's report that we'll see later as to how do we position the financial sustainability risks within our risk register that can help others acknowledge and recognise some of the constraints around that.
Thank you, Claire. Let's move on then to Alistair. Alistair, Neil.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks also for the summary, Stephen. It was very informative. I just wondered if you might expand a little on the high priority area, the recommendation around switching services.
Well, we'll come back to that later on, Alistair, if we may.
Okay.
We're just taking the financial sustainability now, and I'll go back and Stephen will present each audit in turn. So unless there are any other questions on the financial sustainability, Alistair, I'll invite Stephen then to take us through the next audit, which is the embedding the stakeholder engagement strategy. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, and please do stop me because I will happily continue talking, as you may have noticed. So, thank you again, Chair. Thank you for all of the points raised. So, it is worth maybe me trying to link in the stakeholder engagement with performance management, but I won't. I will still keep them separately. With both reviews, we were looking to understand a couple of things. What is the strategy in relation to these areas? What are the plans to embed these strategies? And how are you measuring success and performance of that? And that's a theme that applies to a greater or lesser extent within both reviews. But in the case of stakeholder engagement, we found that at this point in time, good progress has been made. We could see a clear linkage between the strategy and the plan. And we could see milestones begin to be set. There was a couple more still to be done, but in the grand scheme of things, it was a minor number. We found it to be very good, and we just raised some recommendations around formalising the process and tying it in with the performance management work that's underway as well, and at a similar point of progress to enhance that monitoring. But generally overall, it was good on both reviews actually, but specifically on stakeholder engagement, it's very good. And we raised a few recommendations to help enhance the progress that's underway. I think that's all I'd like to say on that.
Thank you, Stephen. It is an important audit for us, and we have Ivan Evans to respond on behalf of DHCW colleagues, as well as our Head of Engagement, Nadine Payne, and a very warm welcome to you to, I think, what is your first Audit and Assurance Committee meeting, Nadine. Ivan.
Diolch, Maida. I'm just going to very briefly introduce Nadine and the report. The stakeholder engagement strategy and the plan were confirmed around about a year ago, just before I joined DHCW, so I really welcomed internal audit coming in to have a look at those. And Nadine's appointment was in the autumn as well, just as this work was getting going. So I think it's been very useful for both of us to have the audit team come in, and we're really grateful to them for having worked closely with us. And the board, I know, is interested in this, and one of the recommendations is a more regular 6-monthly update on how we're iterating, and the next one of those is scheduled for April, where there'll be a chance to discuss as a whole board. So really, I just want to thank all of the team that have been involved in this. The one thing which I want to hold is that I think that stakeholder engagement, and to a degree performance as well, and I'll say a similar comment on the next one, it does need a structured process. It does need smart, measurable targets. It does need data points and measurable, tangible KPIs. But it also needs a little bit of fluidity and flex and agility and ability to respond. And not everything can be measured in the engagement world. Yeah, and I'm very keen to protect some space for judgment and for feel and for character and personality, not a purely process-driven method. So I'll just hand over now and introduce Nadine in case she wants to say anything on the specific recommendations, and then we'll come to the next performance report after that, and questions, of course.
Thanks, Ivan. Hi, everybody. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me along today. So my first one, just to reiterate what Ivan said, it was really helpful for me coming in, having the report actually to give me some focus on and to look at. And, you know, it was a good piece of work done. And what we've tried to do then is develop a streamlined action plan, because we had to look at the capacity internally and what we actually can deliver. So we've developed a full streamlined action plan, which will be coming to the board in the next month. We've put milestones and timelines against all those actions then as well, and we've introduced then a 6-monthly report, and as Ivan said, it should go to the board, and it also makes sure then we can make ensure the alignment with Digital Health and Care Wales priorities going forward and objectives. So I'll be introducing that as well then. We've got the smart measures in there, so I think Ivan's right, keen to balance up the metrics measurements with some of the more intangible stuff that comes with engagement. I think that'll be the challenge for us as we develop that over the next year then. But thank you so much for the report. It was really helpful. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nadine. And as colleagues around the table will recall, this was a key priority for DHCW when the board was established. We recognised that there was a need to develop our engagement strategy and to renew our links and strengthen our links with stakeholders across the piece. So it's really pleasing to see this strategy being implemented, and I'm sure we all look forward to seeing those milestones put in place and to hear about progress coming to board periodically. So thank you for that. I can't see any hands up, which signals to me that colleagues are very happy with your observations, and I think the report has been a helpful one and has highlighted the steps that that need to be done, and you've accurately reflected the steps that you're already taking to strengthen our approach to engagement. Felly, diolch yn fawr. Thank you. So let's move on then. We note the embedding the stakeholder engagement strategy, and I'll turn back to Stephen once more for the third internal audit on performance management, which you've already referenced. Stephen.
Yes, thank you again, Chair. So yes, like stakeholder engagement, this is reasonable assurance, and again a strong reasonable assurance report overall. Likewise, again, we found good progress had been made. A framework had been developed to help provide guidance to staff. The necessary approvals were in place as well, along similar time as the stakeholder strategy. And overall, we found that there are good report metrics in place. As Ivan said, fluid ones. It's not rigid, but we're finding areas being monitored that we would expect. In total, there's around 8 detailed sections. It is presented monthly, and summary goes to the board, so that visibility is there as well. And generally, it was just some minor suggestions and recommendations around strengthening the linkage between the monitoring going through, linking it through to the stakeholder engagement one previously, and just continuing to formalise the process. It's quite difficult overall, because we see that very good progress being made, is working, it's achieving its goal, and actually the recommendations that we flagged up are quite small in comparison overall. Again, it was a very positive outcome from that review as well.
Diolch, Stephen, and I'll turn to Ivan again for your response as management.
So I think Stephen's being very modest in the recommendations are small. I think they're small, maybe they are, but I think they're also very, very useful. As board members will know, we deliver a very broad range of activities. We've got a very, very busy and full catalogue of service delivery, as well as our own internal delivery. and measuring our performance against such a wide portfolio has always been a challenge. The performance team and teams across the HCW, I think, do an absolutely fantastic job, but a lot of that is through dialogue. It's through discussions, and that's something which is good. But I've been a civil servant and working in the public sector for more than 10 years, and I'm sort of starting to embrace certain aspects of process. So the recommendations on a framework and documenting some of those exchanges in a bit more detail, and in particular, and these are actions that I've reserved for myself in the responses, to make sure that directorate meetings are monthly looking at performance and documenting the way that they're looking at performance, I think are really helpful. So just to reassure people that I'm not always taking the position that we need less process. Sometimes we need a little bit more structure in what we do, still keeping things as streamlined as appropriate. But again, the report has been really helpful, and the engagement with the teams and the discussions that we've had back and forth between ourselves and Alison, who I'll introduce in a second, and Stephen and the team, I think have been really helpful in refining the way that we work, and we'll continue to do that and keep board members appraised. I think Alison is on the call. I can't see her on my screen.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, there's too many on the screen. So I'll just introduce Alison in case there's anything that she wants to add on the individual recommendations. There are several for her, as well as 1 or 2 for me. And then I can see there are some questions coming after that, which we'll both respond to.
Alison,
Thanks,
you're very
Eva.
welcome to your first Audit and Assurance Committee, I think. It's true to say, Alison, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much, Marianne. Well, as head of performance, I'm keen that we get things right and we create a culture of continual improvement across the HCW. And as part of that, my main aim for 23-24 is to be able to create a cohesive set of KPIs that underpin the ambitions of DHCW to improve and grow. We've got the performance framework in place, as you mentioned, and we're partway through rolling that out. So the audit has come at an opportune time, and it helps us to focus on how we can do things better. I welcome the recommendations and I'm building them into my plan at the moment. And I'd like to thank Stephen. If you could please pass my thanks on to Philip for making the process as painless and straightforward as he did. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Diolch. It's pleasing to hear that the audit has been as helpful as it has been in terms of focusing the minds. And I can see Alison. Alistair, you've got your hand up, haven't you, Alistair?
Thank you, Chair. It's just really a question for Ivan and Alison, perhaps, on the metrics and the nature of the performance metrics that we use. Are they blended from internally set and externally set metrics that we measure our performance against? And Stephen, are you satisfied that we are measuring ourselves against the right metrics? Is there a process that you've engaged in assessing that?
Shall I go first? So we, the board, have discretion over what metrics to set ourselves. As you recall from conversations, I think, in the November board meeting, where we talked about uptime, for example, which we've added into the IOPR, which is one of the regular reporting mechanisms at board level, where we can, we look to benchmark ourselves against other organisations and to use, if you like, recognised standard KPIs, if those exist. They don't for everything. You'll see in some of the comments that we're saying that it's not possible to have an SPC, or in my view, it's not possible to have an SPC run chart or a KPI or a numeric KPI for every single thing in the performance framework, and that's because the performance framework includes engagement, for example, which is quite difficult to measure on a purely quantified quantity basis. And then my final comment on that is that the KPIs that we use, we're constantly reviewing and discussing that. You'll have seen that the IOPR has evolved. My message to the teams is evolution, not revolution. So has evolved through each meeting over the last 6 or so board meetings. Every time we're trying to strengthen, we're trying to improve. So we determine what the KPIs are. There are some that government would impose for us, but in general we have discretion. But we try not to just make them up. We try to base that on industry standard practices or KPIs.
Thank you. And Stephen, would you like to come in on the second point?
Yes, likewise, that was certainly one of the areas that we focused on throughout the review, and Ivan raises a very good point again around the type of metric that we are measuring, and we do see this quite a lot. It doesn't have to be a quantitative aspect they're working towards, but we did certainly assess across each of the areas that we would expect to be included. And within our work, very often what we do, we complete a series of mapping exercises to understand these are the organisational objectives. How are these being monitored and tracked? So we would expect everything to be in line with that, because that's ultimately what the organisation is seeking to achieve. And it may be at a more granular or a higher level of detail. But overall, we were certainly very satisfied with what we saw. We recognise that they will, as Eva said, evolve and change. But starting point that is at when we looked at it, or the point that it was at when we looked at it, we're very happy with.
Thank you, Stephen. And one last question from Ruth before we move on to the fourth and final audit before us. Ruth.
Thanks, Marion. I think it's just following up on Alistair's point and Ivan's answer about evolution, not revolution. We have seen this evolve, particularly over the last year or so. And I think the challenge for us as a board is to properly articulate what we want to see and what would be helpful for us. And I don't think we've always been particularly good at that in the past, but we're getting better. And the point around the stuff that we can't quantify at the regulator, we used to call that the judgment overlay, Ivan, and you can quantify anything under that. So I think there has to be space for that, and it's space for judgment, and that's our judgment as a board.
Thank you, Ruth. So we note the overall reasonable assurance on the performance management audit, noting also the it's been drawn to attention in the report the need to refer this particular audit to the Digital Governance and Safety Committee, to the board and the management in board indeed, in order to improve the linkages between various performance management processes. So we'll pass on that to those particular committees. And move on finally then to our fourth audit, and switching services. And we have Carwyn Lloyd-Jones, Director of ICT, and his colleague Andrew Warburton as well, who's joining us to respond to Stephen's introduction on the final audit before us. Stephen, first.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I will pass across to my colleague Martin. And whilst I could probably give some introduction, it may not be a particularly good introduction. So whereas Martin will be able to give a comprehensive review and answer any questions as well. So Martin, if you may. Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Steve. Yes, with switching service, the aim of the audit was to ensure that the service is maintained properly and the risks are identified and managed properly. The overall core objectives were to ensure the risk is fully understood, the mitigations are in place, that data governance is in place, and the hardware and system is being maintained, and there are continuity processes in place to protect the organisation. So yeah, overall, it's reasonable assurance. The risk is well understood and monitored regularly with reporting in place. There's strong data governance controls in place over the data, and there's been new hardware installed to increase the resilience position for the service. The key findings then within the report is that the mitigating actions as defined against the risk have been slow to move forward in some ways. Partly, I think, due to the age and complexity of the service, and also because NDR is going to be taking on the role eventually, and that's also kind of underway, so it's been a bit slow there. The second point I want to note is there hasn't been much maintenance and updating of the service over time. It is a very old service. It's developed over time, and it's quite complex in the way it's been put together, and it does use some old technology in there. And then the third core point is there's no formal disaster recovery plan for the service or the system, and knowledge of the system is focused on one or two people, which makes it hard to maintain DR. And final point I'd like to raise is that there's limited departmental continuity plan that sets out what the department information should do if the service fails. But the key individuals do have an idea of what to do. It's just not formalised within any kind of document. So if they're not there, it'd be problematic. But overall, it is reasonable assurance is a very stable service. It's just old and probably needs to be brought into NDR sooner rather than later, really. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Martin. I'll just invite Carwyn initially, if you've any comments you'd like to make before I open for questions.
I think Martin has covered it quite well there. You know, the problem is that the system is very old, sort of, you know, probably 20 years or so, you know, old. It's been dated a little bit over time and functionality has been added in, but it is really now due for replacement. And everything really is around, the main focus of the report is on solidifying what is going to happen with its replacements, with then the work to, you know, to develop a disaster recovery plan and the business continuity arrangements within the information services team as the sort of stopgap, really, whilst that work carries on. So there is just one thing, you know, just as part of our kind of general upgrades to get rid of legacy operating systems and things like that, we have upgraded the operating system that this platform runs on. And so that has given us now the opportunity to potentially add in a little more resilience, so that we have some kind of warm standby at the other data center. And so on that front, the team have committed to two actions, one which is slightly shorter term, which is to update the DR documentation for, you know, like a restore from backup, and the second one then to investigate what our options are to provide slightly higher availability in, you know, for the gap that we have between now and when the functionality is replaced by the NDR. I think, Andy, you're probably better to talk about where things are with the NDR program. I think there's been some progress is being made there as well.
Thank you. And Andrew, would you like to come in on that point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm Andy Warburton. I work in information services, and we are the consumers of the switching service. I think Martin has summed it up very well, as has Carwyn, and I think I really welcome this audit report for the fact that there has been significant change to the way in which the switching service has been used over recent years, particularly around the COVID pandemic. And I think it has highlighted the issues around its aging software, and I will re-emphasize that it's not the hardware, it's the software, and its limited change capabilities of ongoing functionality requirements that we're looking to implement. So just very briefly on the business continuity plan for information services, as Martin highlighted very accurately, we know how to do it. It just wasn't fully documented. That has now been resolved and completed. I have seen that and signed it off as a first initial draft, and we are confident that we have a short-term workaround should that fail. Clearly, there is still the concern around how long that is sustainable for, and I think this audit has highlighted the other factors that are risks around this service, whereas initially it was born of resilience. So I think that is but part of it. We have now separated out that risk as recommended by Martin to the subsets of that risk, so we can mitigate those separately because they have different action plans against those. So, but with regards to the business continuity, I can confirm that that has been resolved to the committee. With regards to the NDR, which is clearly what we are looking to be the future for data acquisition in general throughout Wales, to, I won't say replace the switching service. I hope it brings in a lot more rich functionality going forwards in this day and age. The action currently lies with Ridian Hurl and Rachel Powell to agree with the NDR programme a date and plan to start that work, because clearly the longer it goes on, the more we are left behind with implementing that additional functionality. So I'm unaware at this point in time whether that discussion has taken place with Ivan and Rebecca Cook, but certainly once that plan has been agreed between the parties, I believe that action for the NDR within the audit report will transfer over to the NDR programme. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew, and I can see that Ivan's prepared to come in to respond to that last point that you made about the date. Ivan?
Yeah, so I wasn't anticipating the question, Marion, so I haven't got a date, but I can confirm that I've had discussions with Rebecca over the several months actually around the switching service and what would happen in a worst case scenario. I mean, as it says in the report, it has been an extremely stable service, but were it to go down, it is capable of or what the switching service does is capable of being replicated through manual process. I mean, that would be laborious and onerous, but it is capable of being done on a manual basis. And as the report says, and as Andy and Karen have mentioned, it's not about replacing the switching service so much as deprecating the need for the switching service. As we move to the new NDR architecture of APIs, that would be a whole different mechanism. So I haven't got a date. I'm happy to come back to you afterwards and pick this up, but I have had several conversations with Rebecca, so to take comfort from that.
Thank you. That's very helpful for the committee to receive that assurance, Ivan. And may I take this opportunity right before I draw this to close? I can see a final question from Ruth.
Diolch, Marion. I think it was just a comment really around assurance, and this topic is covered by DG&S. So I think the assurance that I would want us to get as an audit board would be that DG&S is fully all over this issue, and I know has looked at switching service a number of times. So I think in terms of assurance, I feel assured that the right committee is looking at this.
Thank you for that comment, Ruth. That's really helpful. I can't see any other hands up, so I'm going to draw this discussion to a close. We have received the 4 reports, all 4 gaining overall reasonable assurance, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Stephen and his team for the depth of engagement. They're really very, very helpful reports in terms of refining our approach going forward, and as you heard from colleagues, they're very, very much appreciated. Just before I hand over to Audit Wales, I should just like to mention that we have also received a 5th audit report from internal audit, that is the audit on technical resilience. That has received a substantial assurance rating, but as you can appreciate, I'm sure, due to some of the sensitive cybersecurity elements relating to this report, we'll be taking it in the private section of the meeting later today. But with that, thank you, Stephen, and thank you for joining us this morning. Let me take you on then to the Audit Wales report, agenda item 4.3, and it's my pleasure to welcome the lead, Nathan Couch, and I understand that Mike Whitley is also joining Nathan for this part of the agenda. And we have the annual audit report, which summarises the Auditor General's audit work at DHCW over the past year. So Nathan, over to you, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, I'll pick the annual audit report first then. So our annual audit report summarises the findings from the Auditor General's 2022 work at DHCW, which is undertaken to fulfil his responsibilities under the Public Audit Wales Act 2004. The report summarises the Auditor General's overall findings under 2 headings. So it's the audit of accounts and arrangements for securing economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of resources. So the key messages arising from our work during 2022 are summarised as follows. So in relation to the audit of accounts, the Auditor General issued an unqualified audit opinion on the preparation, accuracy and the regularity of the financial transactions within DHCW's 2021-22 accounts. The review of IT environment and application controls applied to national financial systems hosted by DHCW and used by other NHS organisations in Wales provided assurance that financial values produced by the systems for 21-22 were likely to be free from material misstatement, although some controls could be strengthened. And in relation to the programme of performance audit work, the Auditor General concluded that DHCW is embedded in good governance arrangements and must now seek to further develop its role as a trusted digital partner to exploit digitally enabled services opportunities across Wales. And that's the annual audit report. In relation to the last heading then, that'll be discussed in more depth with structured assessment now shortly. Any questions?
Thank you, Nathan. That's a very concise resume of that report looking back at 2022. I'm going to invite Claire to comment and to respond, if I may.
I am sat here like a Cheshire cat. I'm absolutely delighted with that report, and I think it reflects the team's effort. I mean, this was our first ever formal year end, and I'm really proud of the effort that both the team and the audit team actually worked, because you know, we had no baseline to start with, so there was quite a lot of foundation work that as the team we had to pull together and get some guidance together in terms of how best to do it. So I would like to formally thank the finance team for their efforts, because I know it wasn't all smooth running, and they went above and beyond to meet your timelines, but also to do it in a professional and structured way, and also to thank your team, Nathan, because we worked collaboratively in some areas and you challenged us in others, which is what your job is. But I think the approach that we've taken will put us in good stead for the forthcoming year end ahead of us at the end of March. So yeah, I just wanted to formally note the thanks to my team and to the audit team to get us where we got to.
Diolch, Claire, thank you, and it's really pleasing to hear those observations and to hear that there's been such great collaboration. It's what we've been picking up throughout the year, but pleasing at this year-end point review to find that articulated unanimously by all parties. So thank you. Alistair, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just to observe how excellent this is to read. It's extremely reassuring, and taken also alongside Stephen your feedback last week. You know, it really presents the organisation, I think, in a way that it can really move forward with confidence. It can build on this and maybe in some respects be ambitious in areas where it may have previously been more cautious. And I think, you know, in terms of a maturing, self-confident organization that is demonstrably performing well and effectively, I think that's really such an encouraging report. So just thank you. And thanks to everybody who made that possible, because that's the nuts and bolts of it.
Thank you, Alistair, for those observations, and it is teamwork, isn't it? So the committee is being asked to receive the Audit Wales annual report for assurance, noting the positivity within that particular report, which gives us a very strong platform upon which to continue our work over this coming year. So let's turn then to agenda item 4.4, the Audit Wales Committee update, and I'll invite Nathan to introduce this update, which also includes the National Fraud Initiative report, along with the management response, and crucially, we've made reference already to the structured assessment and our organisational response. So back to you, Nathan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my apologies. You're going to hear from me a lot this morning. So
No, not apologise. We're delighted to have you.
Okay, so this is the audit committee update. So I'll take financial audit to start off with. So it's a very brief update on that, to say that our financial accounts work is all complete and we're now planning for the forthcoming financial year. And we've also completed our review of the national financial IT systems hosted by DHEW, which I've just referenced as part of the annual report presentation. And that's pretty much on the financial audit side of things. I'll just bring in Mike to see if he wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Good morning, all. As Nathan said, it's a brief update from a financial audit perspective. We're just starting our 22-23 kind of planning work, and have had a useful planning meeting with Claire, Mark, and Sian in the finance team. And I meet with Sian and Mark fairly regularly to discuss kind of ongoing issues. So that's all just kind of starting off now. We've kind of got a broad outline, I think, of what we're seeing as some of the bigger issues that may be coming kind of our way in the audit. And really grateful to Claire and Mark for flagging those with us early. And just to re-emphasise, I know we touched on it previously, just that openness and willingness to engage with us, to try and kind of get these potentially bigger issues out of the way sooner rather than later. And it just really speaks volumes about kind of how kind of DHEW treat the audit. They treat it kind of very seriously, but are very open with us, which I very much welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Right.
Sorry, I was just going to continue with the performance audit section, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you. Okay, so in terms of performance audit, work completed. So our 2022 structured assessment and annual audit report, which I've just discussed, and then we're going to be discussing the structured assessment report straight after this. Work currently underway. We've begun our All Wales thematic work on workforce planning. Field work will be taking place over the course of the next couple of months for that. Planned work not yet started. So for our local piece of work at DHEW, we agreed that the review will focus on digital primary care services, specifically the governance and financial management arrangements of the GMS programme board. So we're currently scoping that work, and we're looking to begin field work now in March. In terms of recent NHS related reports, Exhibit 5 within the update provides links to various national reports published since the previous Audit and Assurance Committee. We've also provided a summary of key messages arising from our National Fraud Initiative report in Appendix 1. And our Learning from Cyber Attacks report is on the agenda for today's private session. Finally, committee members may be interested in our recently published fee scheme for 23-24, which is available on our website.
Thank you, Nathan.
Happy to take questions.
Any questions or observations following that introduction? I don't think there are any. Would you like to move on then to the National Fraud Initiative report and crucially the structured assessment, if you'd like to add anything on those? I mean, this is our first formal structured assessment that DHCW has undergone, and it builds on the baseline governance review. There's an update later. There's a lot of linkages and overlaps here, clearly, but it's a very pleasing report from your conclusions, certainly, Nathan.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. I can talk about structured assessment for you. So that the report sets out our findings from the 22 structured assessment work at DHCW, and is designed to help discharge the Auditor General's statutory requirement to be satisfied that NHS bodies have proper arrangements to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of resources. The focus of the report was on the organisation's corporate arrangements, with specific focus on the governance, strategic planning, financial management arrangements, and arrangements for managing the workforce, digital assets, the estate, and other physical assets. The approach to delivering the work was involved review of a range of key documents, observations of committee meetings, and interviews with several senior officers and independent members, and that's outlined in more detail in Appendix 1 of the report. The draft report was discussed in detail at the board development session in December, and has also gone through a thorough clearance process with the organisation, who were content with the factual accuracy of the findings and overall balance and tone of the report. So in terms of key messages, overall, as I've already mentioned as part of the presenting the annual report, we concluded that DHCW is embedding good governance arrangements and must now seek to further develop its role as a trusted digital partner to exploit digitally enabled service opportunities across Wales. Supporting that conclusion, our work found that DHCW is well led and made positive progress in establishing and embedding appropriate arrangements to support good governance, has effective planning processes, but further work is required to develop its longer term strategy and to include milestones and targets in some plans to enable effective progress monitoring. DHCW has a generally effective approach to financial planning, monitoring and reporting. The organisation's funding model presents risks that need to be actively managed in the medium to long term, and has a good commitment to supporting staff well-being and good strategic approaches in place for managing its digital resources and the estate. However, its arrangements for managing physical assets require strengthening. The review identified a small number of areas for improvement, specifically around the lack of target dates and milestones in some corporate plans and strategies, and a lack of visibility at board level of the organisation's arrangements for managing medium to long-term funding and savings risks, and board level oversight of the management of physical assets. We subsequently raised 3 recommendations, all of which have been accepted by management with appropriate actions and implementation dates. And just finally on this, I'd just like to express my thanks to DHCW colleagues for their engagement during the review. It's a very labour-intensive piece of work, but the organisation's preparation and engagement throughout really helped its delivery. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you for your comprehensive resume there of what has been a long and complex process to get us to our first formal structured assessment. And it's very pleasing to note the recommendations that are in the main low level and hugely positive conclusions. I'm going to turn then to Chris Darling, Board Secretary, to respond on behalf of management, if I may, firstly, and I'm sure others will want to comment. Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So the first thing I just want to comment on is the continuity in the Audit Wales team from the baseline governance review to this review. I think that really helped us, and I think you can see some of the progress in areas we've built on, matured, grown from the baseline governance review, and I think having that continuity has really helped kind of highlight those areas. So that's been really helpful, I think, for us organisationally to understand where we're growing and where we need to put more focus into. Pleased with the report overall. I think there's areas we need to make sure we're not complacent and we continue to focus. We had the advantage as a new organisation to set the tone in terms of operating in an open and transparent way, and I think it's really important we continue to challenge ourselves to do that. There are a few areas, I think, within the report, not necessarily within the formal recommendations, that I would just pick out. The first one, programme governance arrangement, the report references an independent piece of work that's taking place at the moment. I think that's really important for us from a governance perspective, and we will track that through. And I know board members are aware through updates from the chair at board meetings on that. I think the second point, really the point Ruth raised earlier around financial sustainability, but not necessarily our role within that, but the system's role and how we kind of maneuver the system to understand what a sustainable model looks like. And I know Claire's very much leading that on behalf of DOS, etc. And then finally, I think the long-term strategy for DHCW, was referenced within the structured assessment report, and the need to try and motor on that. We are waiting for the Welsh Government digital health and care strategy to be published, but nonetheless, that still has to be a priority for us organisationally moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. I think you've responded very effectively to the key points that arise from the structured assessment. Claire, I know you'll want to elaborate and add your own view of the world.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would echo some of the comments that Chris had made. The bit for me that, and it's a common theme, isn't it? It's come up already today about the long-term and medium-term sustainable financial position, and how do we position that in terms of the risks more effectively, but equally, how do we position DHEW so we really highlight and assure ourselves of our role in improving our financial sustainability through recurrent savings plans and efficiency and effectiveness. I mean, that links back to your performance measures and how do we capture those. So for me, I think there was the next steps for me is really to enhance our reporting around savings, and we'll do that through the management board, but also through the SHA board. The chair in particular has an interest in non-recurrent savings targets and our role to deliver that, as does this committee. And equally, I think it for me, it gives assurance around our governance and our processes to date. And for us, we just need to build on that now and develop it. But I think for me, the importance is that medium and long-term sustainability position and how we, as DHEW, play our part, but equally, how do we make others aware of their role in ensuring our future financial envelope.
Thank you, Claire. We've heard from our executive colleagues on DHCW. Are there any comments or questions from independent members? I can't see any, so I think the case and the conclusions have been presented very thoroughly, as well as reflections on the management responses. There are a few areas, as outlined, that we can continue to build on, and there are some huge challenges, clearly, but it's very, very pleasing, I think, that this first structured assessment has given us a very strong level of assurance that we are approaching things in the most appropriate way, so that our financial, both medium and long-term sustainability is in as strong a position as possible. So thank you. We note then the structured assessment. And we've referenced the baseline governance review. I'll just turn to Chris, maybe just to bring the final strands of this together to the committee. I suspect that this is the last time that you'll bring the action plan report, because I would imagine that it will dovetail rather nicely into the work and the recommendations produced by the structured assessment.
Yeah, thanks, Marion. Exactly that. So today, the report that we've got just highlights where we've got to in terms of the opportunities for improvement from the baseline governance review. So committee members will recall the baseline governance review came to this committee pretty much exactly a year ago. We've tracked, they're not formal recommendations, so we've tracked the opportunities for improvement through this committee over the course of the last 12 months. There's a couple of areas just to touch on in terms of updates since the committee last met. Both relate to engagement and communication with stakeholders and partners. So links into the stakeholder engagement audit, really, that we heard earlier. The first one is just to note, obviously Nadine was on the call earlier and has been appointed, is in post now, driving that agenda forward. And the second one, the Assistant Director of Comms post, has been appointed to and started yesterday. So two key areas that will help push that agenda forward. As you say, Marion, the plan now is to incorporate any outstanding areas from the opportunities for improvement identified from the baseline governance review into some of the opportunities identified through the formal structured assessment. Clearly, we'll track the recommendations from the structured assessment through the formal audit tracker, but we're also keen to make sure some of the areas that are highlighted through the structured assessment that are more opportunities for improvement than formal recommendations, that we continue to track those in the same way that we did last year. And I think some of the baseline governance review actions link very much to what's come through in terms of opportunities for improvement from structured assessment. So if you're happy, Chair, we will continue to bring those back as opportunities for improvement and track them over the next 12 months as well.
Indeed, diolch, Chris. So we are being asked to note the baseline governance review action plan report. I can't see any hands up, so in the interest of time, we'll proceed then to agenda item 4.6, which is the audit action tracker. And I'd like to ask Julie Ash, please, Head of Corporate Services, to update this committee on the current status of the action log. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Right, very happy to be here to present what I hope is a very positive report today. So this report provides the status of all open audit recommendations. So those are ones that remained open as at the last audit committee, and it contains also the new recommendations added as a result of reports submitted to last committee. So at the last committee, we had 21 actions reviewed, and we were able to close 11, which again was very positive. So that left a total of 10 remaining open. So we received 2 reports at the last meeting, which were decarbonisation and the audit recommendations tracker. They contained a total of 6 recommendations. So that brought us back to a position where we had 16 actions remaining open. So I'm very pleased to report that we've been able to complete 15 of those, which just leaves 1 remaining on target for completion by its due date. And that relates to use of code software. That's due to be completed by the end of March, and I'm assured that it is on track for completion. So in the cover sheet, I have actually listed all the actions that have been closed. So they referred to a number of different audits, some around workforce, some around the audit tracker, and I think that there was another one relating to sort of organisational development. So they're all listed. I won't go through them in detail in the interest of time, but I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. That is an impressive list of completions, if I may say, since we last met in October. Very pleasing to see such excellent progress being made with a total of 15 actions completed. Alistair, I know you want to come in.
Thank you, Chair. It's really to echo, I think, what you're saying, Chair, and it's extremely reassuring that our organisation, it seems to me there is something of a theme in some of the reports we're looking at this morning in regard to good preparation and very effective response to actions that are required. And I think it speaks really highly of the calibre of people we've got who are making those things happen. It's certainly not the experience that I've got that is very, very common across either public or private sector organisations. It's very variable, and I think it's extremely encouraging to see that. It gives us tremendous assurance, I think, in terms of how the organisation can move forward very effectively. So it's really thanks to everybody who's been involved in making that happen.
Thank you, Alistair, and I'm sure you echo all our thoughts around the virtual table this morning. Excellent progress, and this committee will, of course, continue to monitor progress against any remaining actions going forward. Thank you, Julie, and thank you for bringing such a positive report to committee. We'll move on then, if I may, to agenda item 4.7. We are making very good progress, actually, in terms of time. And this brings us to the audit themes review, which is a standard agenda item for this committee and very helpful in terms of our learning from the audit themes. So I will invite Chris Darling, our board secretary, now to present this review. Chris.
Thanks, Chair. I'll present this, and Marion, perhaps after this, there's the National Fraud Initiative that Mark might just want to cover off the management responses to. So in terms of the audit themes report, I think Ruth challenged us quite early on in audit committee to ask that we kind of try and go beyond just looking at addressing recommendations and take learning from a number of recommendations and essentially pull through some of the themes that are coming through the report. So we did that. We reported last year for the first time, and this is a follow-up report to that report. You'll see from Appendix A of the report that we are now tracking all our recommendations from internal and external audit with themes to try and pull out some areas where we can take strong learning. I think it's probably fair to say that it is a challenging task that Ruth has set us. It's not straightforward, and part of the reason I think is because a number of the audits that are undertaken differ, depending on the type of audit that's being undertaken. So we're trying, myself and Julie Ash are trying to work hard to theme areas to make sure we get as much learning as possible. But a few things that have come through since we established business continuity and disaster recovery plans has certainly come through a number of times in terms of themes. The role of the NDR and ensuring that there's clarity both internally within DHCW and out with partners of what we mean when we say the NDR. Robust workforce planning has come up a number of times through audits undertaken, and that's been a bit of a theme, as has risk and board assurance reporting. Clearly, we are going to take into account structured assessment feedback and the audit recommendations we've had today, which I think will probably actually reinforce a number of the themes further, rather than add different themes. So those were the areas I wanted to pick out, and I guess just give the committee some assurance that we're continuing to do what we can to try and make sure we're taking the learning, but it's probably worth saying it's work in progress as well. We're still working our way through the best way to do that.
Thank you, Chris. There are no surprises there. We are all very familiar with the areas that have been considered in some depth by this committee, certainly, and by the board more broadly. But as this was a challenge posed by Ruth, I think it's been a very helpful exercise, actually, which will be reinforced by the themes that we've seen arising from the structured assessment. But it would be helpful to get your view, Ruth, now you've had the opportunity to read through the contents of this report.
Diolch, Marion, and diolch, Chris. I think I'm glad it's a difficult task, because if it were easy, that would imply that we perhaps had some systemic issues that were very easy to identify across lots of our audits. We might always have a problem with reporting or with systems, or things were being picked up in our finances that were consistent themes. So I think my view would be I'm glad it's more difficult to find those consistent things, because that means that largely we're clearly operating well across the space of the areas that have been audited. So I look forward to it. Sorry, Chris, continuing to be a difficult task for you on that basis. I think more broadly, if I reflect on the feedback that we have from the auditors, both internal and external audit, around all of the audits that we've had, one of the things that comes up isn't necessarily picked up within the audits, but we have identified, I think, that we've got some significant key person risk when it comes to responding to the audits. We've got very good relationships, very good flows of information, and particularly those flows of information come through our finance directorate and through our board secretary, and clearly we're able to manage our audits very well. And if we didn't have that structure in place, the landscape of our audits might look very different, because I think that helps us as an organisation to be able to continue to respond in the right way and be open about these things. So I think there probably are some broader themes that are not necessarily picked up within the audits that we might want to consider a little bit more as a committee. But it's incredibly helpful. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Julie, for the work that you've done on this.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm going to take Alistair and then ask Claire perhaps to round off this discussion. Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting to look at the report, which I think is really helpful. It seems very much to almost assume that themes would be relating to risks and weaknesses, and it does seem to me that actually we've got some clearly emerging and some now sufficiently well established strengths and opportunities, and those seem to me to be coming through as themes in many areas just as strongly as some that we might well be more risk conscious or risk averse around. So I really just pose this as a question I think that we might want to take into our development discussions around maybe two questions. One, are we sufficiently focused on those strengths and those opportunities within the environment within which we operate and against our strategic objectives? And two, what can we do to build on them? You know, just as a final thought on that, it's probably a reflection on our development as an organization, that it perhaps is more natural for us to look at risk and weakness that we want to improve on, as opposed to those areas that we have as strengths and that we can potentially see as opportunities. I think it's a very positive situation that I think the organisation is in that situation. But thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. There's some interesting suggestions there. Claire, would you like to come in now, please?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I reflect, this one really got my thought processes going, because the vision of DHCW is to provide world leading digital services, and with that mindset, I was reflecting that a lot of our audits are around validating where we are, not validating where we need to be. And maybe we should look at this more. It sort of builds on your point a bit, Alistair, as you know, we've got a product-based cloud operating model, and understanding our readiness to adopt those processes might be another way of looking at our opportunities, and how do we almost get couched to 5K fit, and understand what we need to do now, and validate some of our strategies to get there. So I actually thought it was quite an interesting time to reflect as to, you know, in 5 years' time, we probably want to look back as a committee and say, thank God we did that audit that highlighted we need, you know, and underpinned some of the activities that we may want to really highlight now and focus on, to make sure that we are world class and leading, because we have the right FinOps team and we have the right people capability to underpin both products and cloud. So I think there's something there about maybe looking at our readiness to do that, rather than some of our processes and governance, which seem to be relatively sharp. So yeah, I think that's good. And the other point I wanted to raise was about the phasing. So this year we've had quite a lot of back-end loaded audits, which suited the organisation and actually has worked really well. As Julie highlighted, with getting the actions done, that seems to be working well, although I think there's a bit of a tsunami coming towards the end of the year with more actions. Having said that, next year in Q4 we've got quite a lot of organisational activity with a data centre move, and with some of the key activities landing in Q4. Q4 is looking to be quite a busy time, as it is now actually, in some of the programs we're trying to deliver. So it may well be we want to reverse the logic next year and actually have a higher frequency of audits in the first half of the year, to tail off in the second half of year, to enable our staff to really focus on some of those key programs. So I think, thank you, Ruth, for stimulating the thought process in that space. I think there's probably some work we probably still need to consider in some of those themes. But yeah, a really helpful paper and approach.
Thank you. Echoing, I think, all our feelings around the table. And Mark, finally, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. It's just to pick up on Chris's comments regarding the NFI audit and Nathan's comments, and in particular some of the recommendations emerging from the review. For me, they're all linked in terms of driving value and making sure we have robust reporting, monitoring, and escalation mechanisms. And as part of the management response, we're going to initiate and establish a group within the Capital Non-Paid Delivery Forum, which will monitor this and manage the processes. And as part of the recommendations, you'll note we will be coming back to Audit Committee in April with the review of the self-assessment appraisal checklist.
Thank you, Mark. That rounds nicely the discussion we had on the National Fraud Initiative. So I'm going to bring this discussion to a close and want to thank Ruth once again for stimulating this discussion, and to thank Chris particularly. I know it's been quite a challenge to draw together all these themes. Not an easy piece of work and not something we've been used to doing, but I think from all the responses around the table, it's been a very, very useful exercise actually, and one which will be helpful to repeat again in future. So thank you all for participating and for producing that report, Chris in particular. So we are asked to note the contents of the report, and we'll take the final agenda item for this part of the meeting, which is the local counter-fraud update report. And I'll invite Gareth Lappington, who's head of counter-fraud for Cardiff and Vale Counter-Fraud Services, to introduce the update report. Croeso, Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be short and sweet as usual. You'll see from the report I've put in the most pertinent things to us over the quarter up until, and the report is up until the 31st of the 12th. So we've up to date done 69 days counter fraud work for DHCW, which is 29 days above what we planned at the start of the year. That was based, as you know, well, that's as a result of a sort of in-depth investigation that we carried out on behalf of the organisation. So I would estimate that by the end of the year, we'd probably be up to sort of double what we should have planned for, but that's fine. And that's good, really, in a way, I think. With regards to staffing, we were understaffed by 25% for the majority of quarter three. I'm pleased to say that we now have a new person in place. So we're back up to speed. So I can provide assurance there that we are now fully staffed and good to go. We continued our work with regards to the infrastructure and the against the annual plan, and I won't go into it in much depth, but I feel that we are getting to where we need to be. There's still some work to do, but we are certainly in a much better place than we were starting the year in April. And during the quarter three period, we dealt with 2 fraud prevention notices from the Counter Fraud Authority, which have been listed there in relation to mandate fraud and invoice fraud. There were no issues with regards to any weaknesses in regards to DHCW, so I can provide assurance with regards to that. The investigation that we were carrying out, that is now complete. A full post-interview investigation report has been provided to the Director of Finance, and that's finalised. There's no more work for us to do from a counter-fraud perspective upon that. During the quarter, we had International Fraud Awareness Week, and we provided a number of digital support materials which were pushed out to staff within the organisation via email shots, notices, and the intranet site. We didn't, for some other organisations, we did some fraud pop-up stalls. We didn't think that was a particularly useful method for DHCW because of the way the offices are spread out across the country, and also the sort of remote working setup. We have worked in quarter three towards developing a fraud risk profile, which is really the final part of the puzzle, if you like, coming together now with regards to building our infrastructure to provide in the counter fraud provision. It's by no means finished. It's a work in progress, but it is a start, and we've carried out one fraud risk assessment in relation to that. Both of those items are provided as appendices for the private meeting. I won't go into any further detail for obvious reasons. And the only other thing to note really is that there is discussion. It's probably important for the committee to understand that there is discussion underway at a higher level than me across NHS Wales about the provision of counter fraud services and the arrangements. And that will continue to take place. I've put in what the ideas so far have come up with 3 options. That's being led by Graham Dainty of the Counter Fraud Service Wales and Andy Butler of Shared Services Partnership, and will continue essentially. And that's about it from me, but I'm happy to take any questions in relation to any of that.
Thank you, Gareth.
Or anything else.
And thank you for your report. Claire, can I ask, are we part of those discussions about, in any shape or form, as to the future of the shape of the counter fraud services?
Yeah, they're being as part of the Directors of Finance Forum. It's an item on that agenda. So we have regular updates from counter fraud, and it will be incorporated in that. So yeah, we are. There hasn't been one for a while. It's true to say, but I know they are working on a future strategy for counter fraud.
And more broadly, I don't know whether you have anything to add in terms of Gareth's report, but the question I had was, are we happy with the level of engagement amongst the staff at DHCW with the sort of awareness raising, the importance of awareness raising at DHCW?
Yeah, I was going to actually thank Gareth because he's been very busy in DHCW lately. Him and his team have been part of the induction process at DHCW. It was one area that we both saw as part of the plan we needed to focus on. And with the transfer of Link and Risg teams to DHCW, there's been quite a number of inductions lately, and I wanted to formally thank Gareth and the team for their participation, raising awareness to members of our staff of the importance of being vigilant around counter fraud. So yes, they have, and I know that there are more planned in the forthcoming plans that we've got in place. So that would be great. Yeah, good teamwork, I think. Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you, Claire. Gareth, would you like to come back?
Sorry, just to come back. The reason I didn't mention that was because that's sort of quarter 4 stuff, but yeah, I probably should have actually, just to bring you up to date, because most of that's taken place post-Christmas. I should actually mention as well, going back to what was spoken about earlier with regards to the NFI. This is the first year that DHCW have been involved in the NFI. We have now had the NFI matches provided to us, so we will be working through those in the near future. It's a very small number of matches for DHCW, so certainly I can tie in with Mark post this meeting to discuss that, but there's certainly not going to be any issues with regards to us sort of getting through all of that in a timely fashion.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you again for your report. I can't see any questions, any hands for observations, so I'll draw this discussion to a close, and the committee is asked to receive the counter fraud update for noting, which we do. And that brings us to the end of this part of today's agenda. We're doing quite well on time, so I propose that we break for a comfort break now, and we resume at 10:45. As opposed to 10:50 on your agenda. So let's get back at 10:45 for the rest of this morning's committee. Diolch yn fawr. Well, I think it is 10:45, so thank you for your cooperation. Croeso nôl i'r rhan nesa o'r Pwyllgor Archwilio. Welcome back as we move on to parts 5 and 6 of this morning's meeting, which contains reports in the main focusing on governance activity. And it's my pleasure to welcome our colleagues from DHCW and specifically to invite Board Secretary Chris Darling to present the opening agenda item in this section, which is the Risk Management and Board Assurance Report. And also to welcome Shikla Mansfield, our Head of People and OD, who will be introducing the deep dive discussion on staff vacancies risks. But initially, Chris, over to you as we note the status of the corporate risk register. Chris.
Diolch, Maren, and yeah, I'm going to the focus of this item will be on the deep dive into the staff vacancies risk, which I'll bring Shikla into that discussion. The committee asked for a deep dive following the last meeting to assess the work of the strategic resourcing group over the last 6 months or so in helping to mitigate that risk. So I'm just going to run through our current risk profile position, and then I'll hand over to Shikla. There's currently 23 risks on the corporate risk register. As committee members will be aware, we have a committee assignment approach, so we assign corporate risks to each of the committees of the board for additional oversight and scrutiny. 7 are currently assigned to the Audit and Assurance Committee, 5 within the papers for this meeting, and there's 2 that are included in the private session later on today. The remainder, there's 16 which are assigned to the Audit and Assurance Committee, which take those risks in both public and private session. Should be noted that the last Digital Governance and Safety Committee held on the 2nd of February did have an extended discussion around the switching service risk, taking into account some of the internal audit recommendations and how to manage and mitigate that risk going forward. So I just want to flag some of the changes to the risk register since the committee last met in October. There's been 5, in terms of movement, there have been 5 new risks, 3 of which were assigned to the Digital Governance and Safety Committee, 2 to the Audit and Assurance Committee. So those 2 were firstly a power outages risk, and secondly a risk relating to the Link programme. There will be a discussion on that programme in the private session of this meeting, which I think will pick up that risk as well, which Michelle will lead on. In terms of risks removed since the last committee meeting, there's been 8 risks that have been downgraded since the last meeting, 3 assigned to the Audit and Assurance Committee and 5 Digital Governance and Safety. The first one is a Welsh language compliance risk that's been broken down into a number of bespoke areas, notably probably recruitment activity, which has seen a real improvement over the last few months. So it's really pleasing to see that. And unfunded national insurance increase. And finally, the power outages, as I mentioned, that came on and has come off the risk register since our last meeting. So that's a summary of the current position. Chair, if you're happy, I'll hand over to Shikla to make sure we have a good amount of time to do the deep dive into the staff vacancies risk. Shik.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you, Chair. So there's a report in the in your pack. Just to set the scene, since the HCW was established in April 21, we've recruited 800. So we started off with 800 staff, and at the end of 31st of December, there were just over 1,075 staff in place. That's been a significant increase in the headcount since we've been established, and obviously we wanted to make sure that the high level of recruitment activity supported the organisation to achieve its objectives and its goals. Obviously, this has been raised as a risk in terms of not having the right people in the right place, and that would have impact on the suitability of the organisation achieving its strategy and results. Just want to give you some highlights in terms of the strategic resourcing group that was mentioned, that was set up, and that's actually co-chaired by Michelle Sell and Sarah Jane Taylor, and we meet on a bi-weekly basis, and the membership of that group is really senior members and programme leads across the organisation, really having a discussion and debate, real deep discussion and debate that impacts the organisation on a wider scale, but also key decision makers, because that was really important to make sure that we had people around that table who were able to make decisions to move
things along quickly. There was, as part of the strategic resourcing group, we've also established a trajectory tool that was created by our finance colleague, and that's really used to predict the vacancies and the recruitment needs. So it was really tightening up the numbers and making sure that we were paying close attention to the numbers and the movements. Also, as part of the strategic resourcing group, we focus on the commercial team who have created a framework which actually allows us to draw down of resource packages that would be available, and that would be available from April 23, recognising that we have nearly 18 months of historical data to know where the vacancies work, where we place them, and where we can't recruit because they're quite a specialist or a niche in the marketplace. So this was important for us to make sure that our commercial team engaged with looking at some of those opportunities that they were able to provide expert support with. The strategic workforce planning template has also been introduced and is currently out for completion, and that will enable us to have a real a focused workforce plan to know and map out where the key opportunities will be, where the heat maps would be, where the risks are likely to be in terms of recruitment, where currently and also in the future. And the resource workforce plan will also enable us to proactively plan for those opportunities and encourage us with growing our own as well. And the recommendation really is to recognise that there's been significant vacancies, but I also want to just balance that by the number of individuals that have joined the organisation. So we've actually grown by nearly, it will be forecasted to grow by 39% since we've been established. So year one, we grew by 23%. Year two is forecast to be around 16%. We've already reached 13% of that growth. And the numbers I'm sharing with you are mainly they are external people that have joined the organisation. So we have 54% of our staff are internally promoted. So on top of that, we've got 54% to add. So it's a huge achievement in terms of engaging with external markets and internal and growing our own. And I think that's a testament in terms of the size and the pace that the organisation is growing, and how we've been able to support the organisation to meet some of that needs, really. I'm happy to take any questions. I've got lots of facts and figures, but I'm more than happy to share further information through questions.
Diolch, Sicola. That was very, very helpful counter through some of the wide range of activities, I think, which helps give this committee the assurance that the staff vacancy risk is being appropriately mitigated. But let me open it out for discussion and questions. Alistair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Shikala. Just, I may have missed it, Shikala, but have you information on the latest year position for staff retention and turnover of staff?
Yes, the staff turnover is 7.7%, which is very low for our industry. Our industry's turnover is around sort of 21 to 23%. It varies. So we're well below the industry standard. However, we do pay close attention to those that are leaving the organisation to establish the reasons why. So we do exit interviews for those individuals that are leaving.
Thank you. And could I just add a second question, if I may, Chair? In terms of recruiting, have we developed any specific strategies for those that are particularly hard to fill, but the general challenge of recruitment for overseas staff, and looking to attract good people from locations overseas where we may find it more we may find it more straightforward in terms of recruitment?
I think we're trying to balance that. One of the key things is we want to grow our own. We want to recruit within Wales, and also balancing the social economic agenda that we have signed up to. So it's looking at can we recruit from within the nation, and then where are those opportunities where we've tried and we've not been successful, that we pursue other opportunities. So at the moment we are still able to recruit within the UK and within Wales, but that's not to say we won't be looking at externally outside of UK.
Thank you, Sicola. Madeline Bryan-Jones.
Hello, I just wanted to check, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sicola, for that wonderful presentation. Just wanted to check, we talked about how difficult the industry is sometimes to recruit people. Have we got any incentives that, you know, we've won the best place to work in the UK? Are there any ongoing incentives we got around people on OD to try to attract those people to get them to stay? That's not just about the cash.
So we've done quite a lot of research on the employee value proposition, how we're unique, and you know, what we find with people that are joining us is not always about finance, especially post-COVID. People are rethinking the purpose of them attending work and why they work, why they go to work. So it's about some of that tying in that emotional heart pulling, the, you know, because people want, you know, the people that join us is because they want to make a difference to the patients and people in Wales. There are a few that will be very sort of money driven, but I would say majority of the people that have joined are recognizing that there's career opportunities, there's growth for them as well. They can establish careers. We invest in their development, the environment, the options that we give them in terms of when they join us as a team. So we've done quite a lot of work on the employee value proposition, and we're continuing to do that and continuing to benchmark what is out there that we can attract and we can build into our employee value proposition. And I think we, as a digital organisation, we're really unique in that we have a national remit, which is very attractive to candidates. Not all the candidates outside would get opportunity to get involved in innovative projects that are actually groundbreaking, that has impact on people's lives. So it's about recognising which areas to highlight to which groups, because obviously now we're looking at the different generation in the workforce. So it's targeting the messages to the different generations as well.
Thank you for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Sicola. Just building on that, if I may, you mentioned, you know, we're keen to grow our own in Wales. We have a national remit as an organisation, and I was struck by the examples of some of the engagement opportunities that we are exploiting, you know, careers fairs in Cardiff, for instance. Could you give the committee some assurance that we are actively engaging the whole of Wales to the extent that it is possible? I'm based in North Wales, so clearly my view of the world may be slightly different from those living in the capital, and just wondered what are we doing to reach out to other parts outside the southeast of Wales?
Yeah. So we maximise our partnership with WIDI. WIDI covers the whole of Wales, and we work in close relationship with them to look at what are the opportunities, certainly within the academia world, in terms of undergraduate, postgraduates, and engaging quite quickly with them to look for and explore opportunities. We do have career fairs. Now, one of the beauty of post-pandemic, if I can place it that way, is lots of these events have gone virtual, so it's not necessarily a physical presence in different locations, and we're able to attract potential candidates to some of our career fairs, etc., through virtual means. And we do have a range of candidates that are across the country as well as from outside of Wales as well.
Thank you, Sicola. I can't see any other questions, but I'll come back to Chris to round off this discussion.
Thanks, Marion. Yeah, it's just a comment really around data quality. I think that's one thing that does seem to have improved over the last 6 months or so. I think we're spending less time querying vacancy and staff numbers, and there's more confidence. I think that's a really important thing, because it ensures you're focusing on what you want to do in terms of filling vacancies rather than the quality of the information that's come through. So I think that's been a byproduct of the strategic resourcing group, and really pleasing to see.
Thank you, and echoing those comments, Chris, I think we've made huge progress, and it's significant, I think, when you look at that headline figure of 39% growth since DHCW was established just under 2 years ago. So we're clearly succeeding despite the challenges of filling some of the posts that we have. I can see Marilyn's hand up again. Marilyn, do you want to come in before I close this?
Yes, just a comment really. Ivan touched on it earlier on in the session to say that sometimes we shouldn't be just wholly outcome focused, because when it comes to staff engagement, people OD, a lot of that cultural flavour, and we can't measure that. But there's something within the culture that's creating that ambience, that's making people feel comfortable and wanting to stay and wanting to explore and develop. So I think that that's something that we should perhaps commend ourselves and actually think about and recognise sometimes that we can't measure every single thing as well. But it's really, woman for me, Shikla, to have those stats around people in OD, because until, as we know in data, what gets measured gets done. So until we continue to do that, then we won't be able to say how far we are down our path. So just wanted to make that comment. That was all. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think that comment is very well made, and I can see nods around the table as well. And I guess our recruitment rates, retention rates is what I mean, being significantly below the sector norm for digital speaks volumes as well about our ability to retain, which is pleasing to note. So thank you for that interesting discussion and presentation, Shikla. We note the status of the corporate risk register and can take assurance that from this presentation and deep dive that the staff vacancy risk is being appropriately mitigated. Thank you. So we'll move on then to agenda item 5.2, which is the making equality impact assessments more than just a tick box exercise. So once again, I'll invite Shikla to present this report and in response to specifically the Audit Wales report received at the last committee meeting. Shikla.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so as you said, this is really a response to the report of the Auditor General for Wales report in September 2022. The report recommendation states that to review the overall approach of our equality impact assessment by public bodies, which is subject to the Act, of which we are one of those public bodies. And the purpose of this report is really to provide assurance that DHCW meets the requirements in line with the public sector equality duty in terms of carrying out equality impact assessments. As an organisation, we do recognise that equality impact assessment is a really important part of our approach to tackling discrimination and promoting equality in Wales. And the Equality Act in 2010 introduced the public sector equality duty across whole of the UK, and Welsh Government actually made it its own regulation setting out some of the Wales's specific duty that bodies listed in the Act needed to follow to meet the public sector equality duty. And basically, in a nutshell, is that we are required to assess the likely impact of proposed policies or practices or any changes to our existing policies and practices on the ability to meet this public sector equality duty. And in doing so, we must comply with the specific requirements to engage with groups that are likely to be impacted and actually monitor the actual impact. So I'm pleased to reassure this committee that DHCW impact assessment procedure meets the requirements and clearly states that any equality impact assessment that is undertaken is to assess the likely impact of what the policies are, what the practices are, and any changes to those to make sure that we do meet this public sector equality duty. And it also identifies any possible negativity impact and considers what are some of the solutions to mitigate those negative impacts. And also, if they are not able to at the point of introduction, will be subject to review. So there's a review time put in place as well. We as an organisation have our own EIA group set up, and that currently consists of senior member of the People and OD team, union representative and Welsh language lead. But we are planning to expand this to include representation from a wider protective characteristic groups through Equality Network, which is at the moment being formed as part of our strategic equality plan that we will be implementing. And the purpose of the EIA within DHCW is really to review all the completed equality impact assessments and make recommendations to the individual who's leading that on the policy or practice, and to make any amendments that may be required before the actual policy or procedure is implemented within the organisation. And any feedback from the EIA group would also include assessment of risk as well as considerations to possible solutions, as I said, to improve any negative impact. So since April 2021, the DHCW EI group have reviewed 10 policies and procedures, and we've also reinstated the Wales Informatic Assurance Group, WIAG, which reconvened in October 2022, and is really that group is being set up to look at that, make sure the DHCW has correct assurance processes in place to enable the safe review and release of national services, and also includes the approval of processes documents to make sure there's clear and auditable assurance process and procedures. Just to let you know that the process of currently conducting EIAs will be reviewed. We've recently appointed interim equality, diversity and inclusion lead, and they are due to start mid-March, and one of the objective for them will be to review the whole EIA process and procedures. So on that basis, there are no risks identified against the report and the recommendation, and I'm asking the committee to approve, to provide the assurance that DHCW are carrying out EIA in line with the public sector equality duties.
Diolch, Siegler, and your introduction was very, very helpful into what was and is a very comprehensive report, which I think is an excellent response to the challenge posed in Audit Wales's report of September 22. You've certainly given us a lot of assurance that the equality impact assessment process is certainly very much more than a tick box exercise. And from the contents of the report, it seems to be fairly consistent across the piece. But maybe that's something you can come back to. And I will ask Ruth to come in as she's indicated a question. Ruth.
Thanks, Marion. Thanks, Shik. That was really helpful. Do we? Obviously, we're looking at ourselves and our own policies and processes. But do we think of the step removed when we do our EIAs, or are we getting any useful information out of that? So, if we think about what we do as DHCW, we create things for other people to use, be that health boards or be that citizens, if we're thinking about the NHS app. And there are lots of issues around equality and access to digital services that we're not in control of, but actually the things we do could have an impact on that. So do we consider how we think about that step removed from us, from our immediate policies when we're doing our EIAs?
I would need to find that out in detail. I'm not able to answer that question at the moment, but I think that is one of the thing, if we're not including it, we do need to include. So can I come back to you on that one?
By all means, thank you. And finally, Madeline Bryan-Jones has a question.
It's very similar to what Ruth has just asked. I was going to ask about the impact of the final user and what EIA is, what we're trying to do. So if we're not sometimes able to access that, it's about how we work in collaboration to bridge that gap, to make sure almost like we do our EIA, but that fits in with the other person's. We almost sort of make the next step accountable. So in a lot of cases, that might be the health service. So we're saying we've done as much as we can in our bit, but can you then do your bit to make sure that at the end we end up not adversely impacting in a negative way on the person who's getting the service at the end of it. So I think there is some work to be done around that. And then secondly, around the EIAs, is that actually for us as an organisation to be comfortable that all the senior leads have a grip on what's actually happening, because I find sometimes, and I'm really pleased in what I've seen within DHCW, but I do see sometimes that we've got policies happen, and then you think, actually, how does that affect what we're trying to do, our strategy, where sometimes we almost need to look at what is EIA, and then look at what strategy do we need to do to create this, to make sure at the end that there's not that disproportionate adverse effect on people. So I think the way organisation is set up, that we do that strategy, then we apply the EIA. I think the culture change for us could be, actually, let's think EIA, then let's think strategy. And then, let's sort of think about it that way. That might already happen, but I'm not, I would be challenge the organisation to, is that happening across the whole of the organisation? I would guess there might be differential impacts within different groups and different service heads depending on their experience to the EIA sort of environment. But that's a challenge I think we as an organisation should definitely look at.
Thank you, Marilyn. That's a fair challenge. I don't know, Claire, whether you wanted to respond. I thought.
Sorry, I was waving. I couldn't get the hand to stay up. But the essence of this is it's more than just a tick box. So I think we've almost ticked the box to say we are compliant with the requirements of the legislations. What you're both articulating is, how do we bring this to life as a digital system leader to either help others solve a problem that could be solved via digital, or actually whether digital provides an obstacle to prevent equality and the deployment of all our systems in an equal way. So I think it's a good challenge, and it's a fair challenge, and it's really about, I think it's almost like most of our influences on digital products, whether they're decarbonisation, whether they're user friendly, it goes back to that. Let's do one thing well, but let's ensure that this is really a consideration at the heart of what we do. And actually, let's go that little bit more and actually become a leader in the area and actually ask the question as part of that process. So I think we need to take that away, because it is, you're right, this is about not being a tick box. This is about the way we do our work and the way we incorporate that into our digital system. So I think there's a great opportunity for us there to take more of a leadership role and really start to influence that, as you rightfully say, with all our stakeholders. But yeah, I think that's a natural next step for us to move forward in that area.
Thank you, Claire. I think we'll take that as an action, if we may, and make a note of it and give some thought as to how we can take that forward as an organisation. So thank you for your presentation, Claire, and thank you, colleagues, for your challenge and observations, and for a constructive response, Claire, at the end of that discussion. So we receive that report for assurance that DHCW are carrying out the equality impact assessments in line with our public duty. So on to agenda 5.3 then, if we may, and the standards of behaviour report. And I shall now invite Laura Tolley to introduce this report on standards of behaviour. Laura.
Thanks, Marion. So this is just our routine report that we present to each committee meeting, covering declarations of interest, gifts, hospitality and sponsorship activities for DHCW. So in terms of declarations of interest, at the time of writing the report, 89% of staff banded 8A and above have completed the declarations of interest form. This is really good progress, and we've exceeded our overall compliance for 2021-22. So I'm really pleased about that. Today, the committee are just asked to note that during this reporting period, that 2 gifts have been declined, 2 sponsorship offers have been accepted, 14 declarations of hospitality were received, 1 was declined, and all of these have been approved by the relevant executive lead. There was one instance in the period where hospitality deemed unacceptable was accepted. This has been addressed accordingly, and then the declarations of interest register is found in full at Appendix B. As always, our standards of behaviour promotion work continues across the organisation, and we recently held a 10 talk where we had 150 members of staff joined, and 70 of those participated in a quiz at the end, which was really great engagement from the organisation. So it's just to note that really, and we're just asking the committee to note the reports, the updates provided, and then obviously happy as always to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Laura. That's a really helpful update on the report, and pleasing, I think, to hear that you've been proactively raising awareness through 10 talks, given that there's always a need, isn't there, to increase awareness in what is a very important area. But pleasing to note that you've exceeded our level of compliance over the last year or so. Ruth.
Diolch, thanks, Laura. I was just going to reflect on the 10 talk because I attended that, and it was well attended. I didn't get all the questions right on the quiz at the end, but as nobody's ever offered me a gift, I suppose that's we're all right, aren't we? But thank you, it's good engagement.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks for sharing that, Ruth. So if there aren't any other contributions, we note the work to populate the Declaration of Interest Register for the HCW, noting in both appendices the declarations of gifts, hospitality sponsorship and honoraria declarations up to the 3rd of February 23. Diolch, Laura. So let's move on then to agenda item 5.4, which is the high value purchase order and cumulative report. And I'll now invite Mark Cox, the Associate Director of Finance, to present this report, which we are being asked to note. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated. So this is the ongoing report to the Audit Committee to give the forum sight of the high value orders that have been processed in between meetings, and to bring attention to the governance route and the formal assurance of the actual procurement activity. It must be said, in terms of the legacy arrangements with our own predecessor organisation, NWIS, we'll see a decreasing amount of identified governance approvals for these particular items. But I guess that's something for the Audit Committee to keep an eye on. So in terms of the unique items over 750k that have been procured since the last reporting period, I'll just take, if I can, Chair, some of the items by exception. So in terms of the digital services for patients and public, there's been a number of work packages commissioned from KNOS. Work package 4, the reference there is A5 and A6, articulates activity in support of some of the GP integration work and some of the GP messaging work, which was carried out by KNOS. A9 and A10 refers to work package 5, and under those particular activities, there was work to support the private beta go live and configuration work to deliver the private beta. In terms of the COVID agenda and the Cabinet Office procurements, the procurement and the orders surround the text messaging and the letters provisions for the service going forward. Must be said, Chair, in this calendar year, we've seen a significant decrease in the number of text messages and the letters generated. We've seen a decrease of some 4% in text messaging and 42% in actual letter provision, and that's been borne out by considerable savings or decreases in costs throughout the year. As regards the Trustmark procurement, that was in relation to the Azure cloud solution and enabling us to access cloud provisions, and that is a contract for a full year. We've also, via Trustmark, provided for SQL Server licenses, and that's been able to provide the licenses across the ICT estate. So in terms of those particular items that have met the 750k criteria, I'll just pause there, I think, Chair, and just see if there's any queries from the committee.
Thank you for highlighting some of those key points, Mark. Can I just ask, do we have any idea why we should see that decrease in text and letters?
Yes, it's very volume based. So in particular, in terms of the amount of cohorts that are signed up to actually receive the vaccinations, there's been a decrease on this time last year over the calendar year.
Simple as that. Okay, thank you. Any other questions or observations? I can't see any.
The second point. The second point, Chair, is just on the cumulative orders which have reached the 750k level, and I know it's an area we're interested in. I'd just like to pick out one area really, and that's the inter-systems support, and that particular procurement is in support of the pathology system, the LIMS pathology system. It is going to be a recurrent order that's produced up until the time that we actually change suppliers.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing that information in particular to the committee, because it is an area that we have, as you rightly pointed out, shown some interest in getting that concrete information. So it's good to have it at our disposal. I can't see any other comments or hands up, so if there aren't any other contributions, the committee then notes the contents of this report, along with the high value and cumulative high value orders raised to date. And thank you, Mark, for introducing that item. And then I'm going to ask you to take us through the losses and special payments update, agenda item 5.5 then. And I think this is a verbal update from you, Mark.
It is a verbal update, Chair. We'll be touching upon a few items as part of the private session, so I'd like to go through some detail there. But at this time, we've nothing to declare at this time.
Thank you. So your update is noted by the committee. So we'll move to the procurement and scheme of delegation compliance report then, which is agenda item 5.6. And I'm going to invite Michelle Sell then to update us on the recent procurement activity.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. A couple of things to call out from the paper. So we've got 2 single tenders that we're reporting for the information of the Audit Committee today. So the first relates to a technical justification in terms of the platform that we use to access our e-library services. And the second actually is for a specialist resource that's been working with us on the COVID vaccination booking. Interesting, Marion, I think just picked that up in one of the previous questions. So we're continuing to work with Welsh Government colleagues and Health Board colleagues in terms of the preparedness activities to a degree around COVID, because it is still a potentially fluid situation. But the work on the COVID vaccine booking system has been continuing. We have had some challenges recruiting into this area, and we have had a pretty specialist resource that's been working with us to take that forward. So I think because of the priority around that particular development and some of the challenges, we have commissioned that resource again through single tender. We are continuing to try and recruit into that team. So it's not considered to be a long-term solution, but it was something that we needed to ensure that we could continue with that development work really without putting that at risk. So happy to take questions on those, by the way, but we've also then presenting a number of contract changes. You'll note there's a theme to these changes. A request was put forward by the licensing stakeholder group who manage the clinical knowledge services, or e-library is probably the term that we would use for that service, to broaden the usage. So this actually enables about 10,000 additional users across Wales to access these services. So these are mainly social workers or social care managers who are providing care, and to ensure that we can offer a consistent level of care. Really, I understand that we've sought to extend the use of these. So the original licenses would have been purely for NHS users, so it is an extension of scope outside of the original contract. But it was something that the group felt was very beneficial to the wider provision of care. We've been able to do that in accordance with the public contract regulations, where there are specific considerations to enable us to achieve these extensions. So happy to take any questions.
Diolch, Michelle. That's much appreciated. Very clear and concise presentation there, highlighting key points from the report. I can't see any questions, any hands up. So I think you've presented the information in a very clear way, probably preempting any questions that might arise. So thank you for that. So in the interest of time then, we'll, as a committee, we are being asked to note the content of the the procurement activity that was undertaken specifically during the period from the 1st of September to the 31st of December 2022. Thank you again, Michelle. And next on the agenda is the Quality and Regulatory Compliance Update Report. And this is Paul Evans's territory. Paul, it's my pleasure to invite you to present this update report, which also includes, as I understand, an update on the Cyber Resilience Unit activity. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I've just arranged a few key points to talk through into three different themes, if that's okay. So firstly, I'll pick up on audit. The risk-based internal audit programme is progressing well, currently showing 94% compliance against the plan. We did have to reschedule 2 audits from December due to some staffing issues with the auditees, but they've been rescheduled into Q4, and that will bring us back to 100% compliance by the end of the quarter. There were 3 external audits in Q3, all were successful. They were for British Standard 76,000, 76,005, British Standard 10,008, and the Service Desk Institute. There were some minor non-conformities raised in each audit, but all were successful. And at the time of writing the report, there were 2 planned ISO audits in Q4. These have now been complete. They were recertification visits for ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. We've successfully retained both certificates, with 1 minor non-conformity for document management raised against ISO 9001, and just an opportunity for improvement around management review for ISO 14001. Next theme is around quality management systems. So the onboarding plan for iPassport is progressing, and currently 49% of the organisation's teams are in the process of onboarding. The iPassport work was actually mentioned by the external auditor for ISO 9001, and he sees that as critical for correcting a non-conformity raised in that audit. So we will continue progressing there. We've seen an increase in IMS documents that are within the review date. It's increased by 6% in the last quarter, and we expect that to increase further due to some excellent work by corporate governance colleagues on reviewing and updating our policies. Our quality improvement action list figures can continue to improve, and the 95% target that we set ourselves for actions within due date has been maintained, and we're currently running at 99% compliant there. The quality portal continues to be a focal point for quality activity within the organisation. Excuse me. And the portal received over 18,000 visits in the last quarter, and has totaled almost 140,000 visits in total since its inception. The final area I'd just like to cover is around legislation. So firstly, with the NIS directive, CRU have produced reports to Welsh Government on 2 NIS reportable incidents across NHS Wales, and also on the cyber risk profile of NHS Wales. And additionally, I've been conducting reviews following the last CAF assessment process, and I've taken feedback from the various OESs across NHS Wales to make improvements to the process for next year's round of assessments. For medical device regulations, I think I mentioned last time that the MHRA have delayed implementation of the new UK regulations to July 24, but we're not slowing down on the project to ensure DHCW are ready to meet those regulations. But the project plan is now up to 49% complete, and an initial assessment of the existing service portfolios being completed. We've highlighted 5 services that we believe are potential medical devices, and during the next couple of weeks, a full assessment will be undertaken to confirm if these meet the threshold for software as a medical device, and if they do, what classification they fall under. And then obviously we'll do some gap analysis work to make sure that we're in a position to meet the regulations for those services. And just finally, you're probably aware that from April the 1st, the Health and Social Care Coordinating Engagement Wales Act comes into force, and this brings with it an updated duty of quality. So the Welsh Government working groups looking at the implementation of duty has transitioned to an NHS-led process. Claire sits on the Duty of Quality and Candidate Implementation Board, and I sit on the Duty of Quality Implementation Group. We've had a roadmap produced by that group in conjunction with Welsh Government, and we've turned that into a project plan to make sure that DHCW meet all the requirements of that duty of quality, and we'll be using that project to track progress and provide reports moving forward. And that's it for me. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. That's a very, very helpful presentation and reflects a huge amount of activity in this area. So thank you for that, and also to commend you really for the high level of compliance, which is impressive indeed. I know that Claire wants to come in as well as Chris, so we'll take their observations next, starting with the Executive Director of Finance, Claire Osmond-Little.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment actually that we're one of the few organisations in the Welsh Government cohort that use a quality management system, and this afternoon Paul will actually be presenting to the All Wales group on my behalf the benefits of iPassports as a potential option for an All Wales solution. So we are slightly ahead of the game. We've got a lot of work to do in terms of the formalities around the quality reporting that we'll have to do post the 1st of April. But Paul is taking the lead in some key areas of that from a DHCW perspective. So watch this space.
Yeah, Claire. Chris.
Thanks, Marion. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the Quality and Engagement Act implementation from the 1st of April. Claire often talks about a culture of quality, embedding a culture of quality within the organisation. I think the Act gives us a great opportunity to reinforce that culture of quality. And I caught up with Paul yesterday, so it's on my mind. It's very timely. I think he's doing a fantastic job of interpreting the duty of quality from a DHCW perspective, because it's probably fair to say the Act does focus, as a lot of legislation does, more on the provider organisations and what it means for them. Rightly so, that they are the majority. But Paul has really done a lot of work interpreting what it means for DHCW, the implications for us as an organisation, and how we reinforce that culture of quality. So I think it's really important, the introduction of this legislation. I think it helps us from a cultural perspective on the journey that we're on. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Chris, and I'm sure it will be helpful at a future meeting to hear more about the work that has been undertaken to meet the requirements of this Act. Perhaps we can take that as an action to include in the work plan going forward. Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. It's more a comment than a question, but I was very struck by the use of the quality portal and the numbers involved in that, which, if I'm reading them correctly, Paul, the 18,000 plus in the last quarter. It's more than one visit to the portal per week on average for every employee. If I'm reading that correctly. And that seems to me to be extremely well embedded. The nature of that would seem like a really good basis for using that portal more and more, because it's clearly being very, very well used. So congratulations on everyone involved in getting it to that position. But it's some impressive statistics.
Thanks, Alistair. I mean, there are a lot of hits, and a lot of those will be the quality team themselves going back and forth and looking at the business as usual for the team. But we are seeing a very high number of hits from outside of the quality team. So it does seem to be well received, and we are continually developing the portal and adding more and more information onto there. So yeah, I mean, long may it continue.
Thank you, and thank you for those contributions, colleagues. So we're being asked to note the content of the update report, and I think it's very pleasing to see the improvements achieved in this particular area. They've really been impressive, and I'm sure as a committee we'd like to wish you well for your presentation this afternoon, Paul. Diolch yn fawr. So we'll move to the final substantive agenda item then, which is agenda item 5.8, the Decarbonisation Estates and Compliance Report. And I'll now invite Julie Ash to present it, noting that Appendix A, as I know you will have seen, includes DHCW's response to the 5 calls to action. But I don't want to steal Julie's thunder, so over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. So this report includes information relating to the estate, so that includes our progress on decarbonisation, environmental management and compliance. As Marion mentioned, we have responded to the 5 calls to action produced after the Audit Wales baseline review, which we obviously responded to. So the 5 calls to action, I'm sure people are aware of it, but I'll just touch briefly on them, relate to leadership and collaboration, strategic direction and implementation, finances, capacity and decision making. So as Marion said, included in Appendix A, and I won't go through it in detail, is the DHCW response. We've also included as Appendix B the latest Estates and Compliance Monthly Report, which provides some detail on our compliance testing, etc. We've continued to attend Welsh Government Community of Experts climate change meetings, so we continue to be involved in all Wales discussions around decarbonisation. Another area to mention, Michelle will be aware of this as well, is we are engaging with shared services to look at low carbon ICT strategy. That's quite a big area for us given the huge amount of emissions related to procurement. So we'll continue to focus in that area. So in terms of communication around decarb and environmental awareness, we do run a campaign. So my team do regularly issue newsletters. We've also, as well, this is a recent development, we've engaged with the Shared Services Training team to update the environmental management training that's provided on an all Wales basis. So it's good to see DHCW being a bit of a leader in that area. So in terms of environmental management, Paul just alluded to the recent ISO audit. So pleased to report that we've achieved recertification for our ISO 14001 environmental management standard, which we've held since 2014 now, so it's quite mature. In terms of estates compliance, we're currently running at 95% against our target of 90%. One area we are going to be focusing on, and this is purely due to a lack of resource within my team at the moment, is internal planned preventative maintenance. I'm pleased to say we've managed to appoint into a vacancy, so we're going to have a new starter coming in March, so we expect to see that figure go back above target in the imminent future. And in terms of health and safety, we've had 4 health and safety incidents reported to date this financial year, all of which have been fully investigated and closed, so there's nothing outstanding there. And we've reviewed and acted upon 52 Welsh Government alerts to date during this year. Just a final few points. We've recently created and appointed to a new role, which is an environmental development and estates compliant facilitator, and they're going to be able to focus on the operational elements of decarbonisation. So that's a very positive move. The final thing to mention, I think, is we've established an exceptional cost pressures group, which has been focusing on opportunities for reduction in energy consumption, which obviously ties into our decarbonisation ambitions. So I'm happy to take questions, Chair. I think that's all I wanted to actually pick out from the report, which is being presented for voting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, for highlighting some of those key issues. Are there any questions, observations to Julie? Claire.
I want to formally thank Julie and the team. They've worked hard in the last quarter with a number of decarbonised initiatives. We've actually delivered some improvements in lighting, but we've also started to look at the office space and how we optimise the space that we've got across the different office spaces. So there's been quite a lot of work, and also the keenness with which that team has taken on the initiatives from themselves, self-developing in understanding decarbonisation and demystifying it for us, which has been most helpful. The team is working really hard in this space. I think we are also, as DHEW, rethinking our decarbonisation plans as we're putting them together under Mission 5, to really think about a system leadership role in this space. Understanding the toolkit that we have and how we make it as low carbon as possible, but equally looking at the benefits that digital can bring in really reducing the overall footprint across Wales. So I think it's certainly an area that we've got to grips with, and now we know what we know, we probably want to set our ambition a bit higher and start to do some more work in this space. So we may need some specialist help to do that, but we're pulling together the plans for next year, and I'm sure at some point we'll bring them back to the committee for further scrutiny and observations.
Yeah, Claire, it's really pleasing to hear about the commitment and the passion really that the team is developing in this particular area. You mentioned the cost pressures group in terms of energy costs. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on that in terms of where you're hoping to get to.
Yeah, so it's really split into a game of two halves, Chair. So we have our office space, which traditionally has been a high energy provider, but at the same time, we've got 2 data centres that inevitably have a high energy cost as well. So we brought the 2 parties together, and Julie has led and helped support the team. And we've tried to unravel the details that are really driving those costs to see if there is anything we should be doing over and above what we do now to minimise the costs associated with the usage around some of those key areas, really. So despite all of that activity, looking forward with prices as they are, there will be an additional £1 million worth of cost pressure next year. So it isn't insignificant. And together with that group, we're working on what we can internally do to improve efficiencies, both in the short term, but also considerations going forward is to what are the strategic things we could do to minimise those costs going forward, and whether we need to accelerate those as a result of where we are and what the circumstances present. So definitely an area that warranted that spotlight, and actually the insights that group has brought is really informing the direction of travel for our plan for next year.
Thank you, Claire. That's very, very helpful. Mark.
Yeah, just to echo what Claire said, really, but it really is a useful group as a key area of focus, not only for I guess engaging and linking in with other alternate issues such as decarbonisation, but also as a idea generation group and a formal mechanism to escalate any of those ideas to execs as well.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any other contributions before I draw this to a close? I can't see any hands up. It's been a really helpful highlight, really, of some of the excellent work that's being carried out in this area. And I think we can take a great deal of assurance that this is being addressed and taken very, very seriously within the organisation. So as a committee, we are being asked to note the content of the decarbonisation, estates and compliance report, which we do. So we're drawing to a close. Thank you, colleagues, for your patience, and we're coming to closing matters. The committee highlight report to board. There is nothing of great significance in terms of concerns, but I just wonder, as we've got a few minutes left, there are some obvious issues that we will highlight to board, reflecting the areas of discussion this morning. But I just wondered, I'll turn to colleagues from Internal and Audit Wales, whether there's anything specifically you wanted us to highlight from your reports to committee today, and perhaps Chris and Claire and IMs, if you have any specific points you think is pertinent to highlight to board, it would be good to hear them. So can I turn to perhaps Nathan first and then Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing's from me specifically. I think we've, the meeting's touched upon a lot of the points of the structured assessment anyway, particularly around the sort of medium to long-term financial sustainability stuff. So that's all I can add, really.
Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Likewise, a similar position, really. I don't think there's anything specific to flag up, but other than the continuing assurance over the areas that we're providing. So we're content and happy with the steps that are underway. So I think it's that level of assurance, really, I think is useful to highlight.
Thank you, Stephen. Looking around the table, Claire?
So I think what it's demonstrated is actually our strengths in governance and in some of our frameworks and our financial processes and our transparency. I think the procurement reports really show our transparency and openness, which I think is echoed through the meeting. I think it also shows our ambition. We're not just a tick box. We're going to really take a leadership role in a few areas, and decarbonisation, digital decarbonisation is certainly one I think personally I'd like to see as part of Mission 5 flourish. But what does concern me is we're going into one of the most financially challenging years ahead. And I think the inflation is one aspect of concerns around our ongoing financial sustainability. And again, that highlighted through the reports. How we capture that and report it well through this committee and also through the board is going to be one that we probably need to consider in our forward work plan. And for me in particular, I think the recurrent savings aspect of that as a financial, our responsibility in the times of financial challenge to show the role that we're playing is an area I think perhaps as a committee we probably also need to consider in our forward work plan, given the circumstances that we're in. So inevitably as a financial accountant you want to be a bit pessimistic, but I think it's great to see great progress, but I think we should also challenge ourselves in some key areas to take the lead. But equally to play our part in the next year to minimise those financial challenges that are ahead of us. And I think as a committee, we will do it in the spirit that we always do it, in openness, transparency, and collaboration. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. And finally, Chris, I don't know whether there's anything you want to add to that.
I think specifically from today's discussions, Marion, I think it's the equality, not just the tick box exercise, the system leadership and the challenge back from committee members to us, escalating that to the board, I think is an important point to note from the discussions today. And I think the Quality and Engagement Act and, you know, the future work plan to do a bit of a deep dive into the duty of quality, those were the only two I'd add to, Marion.
And I guess the only other thing I would add, and it goes back to the structured assessment point about the importance of developing our strategy. That comes up as a theme as well, doesn't it? And work is underway. But I think we need to highlight the significance and the importance of doing that with pace. Ruth, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Marion. I think you touched on it there around our strategy. I think there's a link, isn't there, between how we use our learnings to become world class, not just to say that we're doing what we do really well, but how do we take that to push the organisation on, and that then automatically links into the strategy. So I think there is a real theme around that system leadership coming out from today's committee meeting that I think we need to really, you know, step up that discussion at the board.
Thank you, Ruth. That's been really helpful, colleagues. Thank you for your contributions, not just now, but throughout the morning. I think it's been a very productive, constructive meeting, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank colleagues from Internal Audit and Audit Wales as well for the preparation that you've carried out for today's meeting, and also for the level of engagement that we've had from every single member and colleagues around the board table. I don't have any other urgent business that I've been notified. Can I just check whether there's anything else you want to raise at this point, any of you? No? Okay, well, thank you. We have a comfort break scheduled before we proceed for our private session. That was scheduled to start at 12:10. Shall we stick to that, Chris? I'm in your hands.
If colleagues are happy to start at 12:05, we can try and finish earlier. Does that suit?
I can see the thumbs up and
5 past?
nods around the
Okay.
table, so let's reconvene then at 5 minutes past. The date of our next public meeting is on the 18th of April. Thank you, colleagues. Diolch yn fawr I chi. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.